We simply don't see what is coming. How to build a picture, that's not how the reality works. What a sad story. 3 mistakes that will destroy your company. According to some studies, the average age of the companies have dropped from being in the 1950s somewhere in the 60 years or so, below the 20 years today. According to some research, it's actually below that. It's 10 years. 10 years after which your company gets either sold, there is a new acquisition, it does bankruptcy, or in another way, just being dissoluted and not operating in the market. Now, something interesting is happening in the market that makes this type of a fast death possible. And we will look at this point from the perspective of seeing how the world has actually increased in its complexity, the globalization, the new connectedness between the different regions and between different companies, global supply chains, all of that has built this very type of different operating environment for the companies. So what I was quoting just was the Santa Fe Institute, one of these famous institute that had been doing a lot of modeling around how the world actually works. According to them, this 10 years is the crucial time when the companies come to an age where either they start to lag behind or that they have become successful so that they actually get lost with the realities. So they don't anymore are touch with their clients, they are not touch with their shareholders and so forth. So let's go and see what those mistakes really are. The first mistake is not to see what is really coming. The famous case here is Kodak Eastman, who was one of the key players in the world of photography and films up until this century, up until the digitalization came. It's not to say that they were the ones that didn't see the digitalization and digital cameras and all with that coming, but they were very slow. Why? Because back in the day, they owned at some point something like 90% of the business, of the films, of the cameras that were analog. So obviously that created for them a kind of a idea that they should go as long as they can to milk their cow, so to say, and to thrive the business that they had created and in which they were really so good at. But the change came, and because they were not ready for the change and they were the laggards, in the end, whatever they did with the digitalization of their products and services, they were too slow. The others ate up their markets and they were filed bankruptcy ultimately in 2011. What a sad story. Less dramatic stories are a lot in the market. I can take some of the examples from here, from Finland, where I am now, which is that there were a couple of forest companies that back in the 1990s also didn't see the digitalization coming. They were thinking that there's going to be endless growth of paper consumption in the market. And so they were installing new factories to produce the stuff of the clients in several locations in the world. And it took them about 10 years to some of these companies to realize that, wow, actually, we are getting digitalized. We are not using the paper in the offices anymore. We are not printing for our private purposes anymore. And they were so late that they were trashing a huge amount of money. They were wasting huge amount of money just because they couldn't see that coming, that change coming in time. Because you could see actually that ever since the very early 2000, the total consumption of the paper was actually going down already. And some of the smaller players in the market really were wiped out from the map because they couldn't see that this dramatic change, which was kind of a boiling ever since internet was invented in 1980s, ever since World Wide Web was invented early in the end of the 80s. But all this digitalization that started to really build momentum in the 1990s, in the 2000s, it suddenly became very kind of a driving force for changes in so many marketplaces. And if you were not able to see that coming, particularly if you were incumbent, where you were the ones that had been running the business up until that point, you had a great problems. And as a result of this digitalization, a lot of companies simply got sidetracked and they were kind of left behind and they were ultimately pushed out of the market completely. The other event, what happened with the digitalization, there were instances when digitalization came about that they came competitors, but those competitors came from a totally different lines of businesses. For example, for media companies, it became a great struggle because suddenly there were Facebook, suddenly there were Google, who came to their kind of advertisement market, who were attractive to the advertisers and who took a lot of their business into their digital sites. And this happened quite swiftly. And media companies in many parts of the world were in great trouble finding alternative sources of income. And this is just one example of how this kind of a dramatic sort of a transformation that happened with the digitalization actually wiped out much of the existing business. Now, the only thing that the existing business could have done is to reposition themselves, thinking themselves how they can live and thrive in this new world, which has changed dramatically from the old sort of analog days. And that has been, of course, the channels up until today for those companies, so how they can kind of reinvent themselves. And this happens often, particularly once you are in a situation where you think that your business is running very smoothly. It's been doing that for some time. And certainly when you look at the media company, the traditional media companies, they had been faring very well many decades up until the point of digitalization and the kind of the revolution that this caused to their business. Now, the second fatal mistake that companies can do is that they don't stretch into the future, try to place themselves into the future and see how different the future is compared to what it is today. Now, just look at the recent 2-3 years, how much it has changed the world from where it was on those days. It has changed because of the pandemic, because of the digitalization, because of all kind of changes, whether in the society, in the business, or in the technology. And now with the war going on in Europe, another great disruptor, but that has had a huge impact on many businesses, not only energy, but actually flight businesses, all kinds of businesses that has to do with either with the raw materials, with the food, with the traveling and so forth. Now, the challenge is that unless you make this stretch out into the future and try to see how that future is different and what is your pathway from here to that future, you're gonna miss something very, very important. Because if you are time and again in the situation that you need to be reacting to the already happened changes in your environment, your company is not going to last for too long, because you're always going to be laggard, you're always going to be a bit behind. So what to do? You need to start a serious what we call scenario working. You need to start seriously thinking how the future is different. What are the key drivers that will affect your operating environment? For example, so if you are in one way or another in digital business or software business, how does the 5G that is coming now in the next few years and will have a great impact on the market, how well you are prepared for that? Or how you are prepared for the fact that maybe some of the global supply chains have been broken for a very long time because of these current upheavals in the world, affecting those supply chains very fundamentally. What are your alternative strategies for that? So with businesses, these type of the dramatic changes, when they happens time and again, and this complexity in which we are living today will produce more of them, so that this complexity needs to be understood, and we need to take a step ahead before the actual events occur, meaning that we need to prepare for the different type of the future, and we need to use a lot of internal and external information to understand in which way the world is changed. And that's why we, in our companies, we need to stretch ourselves 10 years, 20 years, even 30 years ahead and try to see how different the world is at that point of time. What are the needs of the customers at that point of time? And what are really our ways, our channels of delivering our products and services? Where do our margins come from? And what makes our company unique in those days? And talking about scenarios, please look at my other related scenario method video from here. The third fatal mistake that might happen for a company is that they come very sluggish after being very successful. So they become a kind of a proud, they stop actually looking too much at the signs of what is happening in their operating environment, they stop listening to their customers and so forth. The classic example of that type of the company is the most known company here in Finland, which is Nokia. Well, Nokia used to be one of the most appreciated brand in the world in the early 2000s. It had been phenomenally successful in the 1990s by bringing into the market the mobile phone and also standardizing the kind of the infrastructure for global operations. So this happened in the 1990s. Company was on this top when around the 2000, and they had the feeling inside the company that, well, we really know how this works, and they become sort of a company that lost a sort of a connection with the customers, but most importantly, they lost the connection to their own innovativeness. And with that, there came a lot of dispute and a lot of kind of internal chaos, where you should have a much more sort of organized way of dealing with the information that has to do with the future. So they, for instance, they went to explore the possibility of this kind of a touch interface that was then later developed by iPhone. But they found it that no, the customers probably don't want it. It's hard to shift from the current operating system and the current kind of interface, and some other issues that prevented them moving swiftly. So they became a kind of the prisoners of their own success very much. And it took the company for a good number of years to realize that, well, this is ultimately a shift that was pioneered, obviously, by Steve Jobs and the Apple and the new innovation called the iPhone, but also that the other companies were also speeding up in this innovation, in this way of how to make it more accessible, more swift, more sort of all-encompassing, the interface between the human being and the phone. So that type of the drama is played out every day around the world when the companies that have been prevailing in the market suddenly becomes obsolete because they are just too much of themselves. They don't hear the signs of the future. They are not able to apply that knowledge that they probably have somewhere there for the good of their own business, to develop, to shift, to move from where they are, explore the new ways of building products and services, and so forth. So let's sum up. In the first case, we are not able to see what is coming, and we just continue in the existing a business. And this is, for instance, what happened largely in early 2000 when the world started to digitalize. Secondly, we don't take the pains of looking at alternative futures, painting the picture of how the future is different to what it is today, and how we should start to prepare that different future. And then the third is that we become too proud, too focused on our own, too disinterested what is happening in our clients and how these needs of the clients are changing. So, summing up, there are three mistakes that companies can do that can be really fatal. The first mistake is that we simply don't see what is coming. We don't see how the change is coming, even if you see it everywhere. And that might be because we have too much kind of stake in the old business. We don't want to move. We are a bit sluggish on that. The second is that we don't do our job in building different scenarios about the future. So we don't try to see how the future is different to what it is today. The third fatal mistake is that we are too lazy, too comfortable, in a way too numb, and certainly too proud for what we have done. And on that moment, we lose the touch with our clients, we lose the touch with the reality, we lose the touch with the change that we should be observing, and we lose the touch with the signals that say us something different about the future. So, what to do about it? The first thing that we need to be doing is that we take seriously this challenge that all the businesses have in front of them, which is basically how to build a picture, how to imagine the future that is different to what it is today. Because if we start to make assumptions that it's going to be tomorrow the same as today, and even day after tomorrow, just the same, we are on the track. That's not how the reality works. There can be times when everything looks pretty confident and as a continuum, but that's always an illusory, because that means only that there is a bigger change that is coming behind that. So we need to get used to the fact that the tomorrow is really different, and to be connected to that future, we need to work hard on it. The second is that we need to keep ourselves in a state of humbleness. We need to be loyal to the information that comes from outside, even if this information tells us that we need to shift dramatically, we need to shift our resources, we need to get rid of something. The more we lag, the more we delay this type of the shifts, the more we procrastinate, the more we are in the danger of losing that business altogether. Subscribe my channel. See the related video about the scenario method that was recently posted, and please come up with your own question about what is the key essential features or why the companies fail. See you.